Demon AI. Demon AI.
Okay, so if I asked you to close your eyes right now, assuming you aren't driving, of course, and just, picture the Christmas story, the classic nativity scene, what comes to mind?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Really try to visualize it. I'm guessing you're probably seeing a silent night.
Right. A peaceful wooden manger, maybe some well-groomed shepherds just gazing in awe.
It's calm. It's cozy. It's the image on 1,000 greeting cards.
Right. It's warm, it's inviting, and I think above all, it's safe. It's the image we've all been culturally conditioned to see for centuries. It's the version that feels good with a cup of hot cocoa.
Exactly. It's comfort food. But here's the problem, and it's really the reason we are here today. What if I told you that the source material we are looking at takes that cozy greeting card image and essentially shatters it?
Oh, yeah.
What if the reality of that story isn't about peace and quiet, but about a family fleeing under the cover of darkness, crossing borders in a panic, living in absolute terror of a politician who wants their baby dead?
That is a much more jarring image. I mean, it's uncomfortable. But according to the author we're covering today, it's really the only honest way to look at it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking a really fascinating and honestly a pretty challenging piece of writing. It's titled Refugee by Design, God in the Skin of the Displaced. It's by Jamin Bradley. And I'll be honest, this one kept me up thinking last night.
It does have that effect. And just to give you a quick sketch of who we're dealing with here, Bradley isn't just, throwing stones from the sidelines. He's a really interesting figure to guide us through this.
He seems to be.
He's a pastor and a theologian, but he also describes himself as a nerd, a musician, and an author. He holds a master's degree in theology and social justice.
So he's got the credentials.
He does. He's coming at this from a place of deep academic study, but he's not writing in a dry ivory tower sort of way. He's writing with a lot of passion and a very distinct modern voice.
Yeah.
He's trying to bridge that gap between the ancient text and our modern reality.
Yeah, you can feel the heat coming off the page in this one. And the mission for this deep dive is pretty specific. We aren't just retelling a Bible story you've heard since Sunday school.
Not all.
We are unpacking Bradley's central argument that Jesus was, by definition, a political refugee.
Which is such a loaded term in our current climate.
It's just extremely loaded.
Yeah.
It carries so much baggage. And more importantly, we're going to look at the uncomfortable theological and social implications that come with slapping that political label on the central figure of the Christian faith.
Right.
It forces us to ask some really hard questions about law, borders, and morality.
It does. And to keep us on track through what is admittedly a complex argument, here is our roadmap for the discussion. We're going to start by looking at the biblical evidence Bradley cites, so revisiting the actual narrative of the flight to Egypt versus, the greeting card version.
Okay.
Then we'll look at how he defines a political refugee and applies it to that story using this really clever modern analogy involving Michigan.
The Michigan analogy, I love that. It's so concrete.
It's very effective. Then we'll tackle the modern counter-arguments about legality and borders, the technically correct crowd. We'll look at a fascinating comparison he makes to Les Miserables.
Yes, the musical.
The musical, exactly. And finally, we'll explore the distinction Bradley draws between human law and divine justice.
So buckle up. This might challenge some assumptions. Let's dive right into the narrative itself. Bradley starts by pointing us to the Gospel of Matthew, specifically chapter 2.
Yes, and he highlights a specific sequence of events that often gets glossed over in the Christmas pageants because, it just doesn't fit that silent night vibe. It's actually a pretty terrified night.
Right.
The narrative goes that an angel appears to Joseph, Jesus's earthly father, and warns him to flee immediately.
And the why here is so crucial. It's not just some vague feeling of
unease. No, it's a specific threat. King Herod, the local ruler, isn't just unhappy. He is actively seeking to kill the child to protect his own power. He sees a threat to his throne, and his solution is state-sanctioned murder.
That's the politician wanting him dead part. It's violence coming from the top down.
Precisely. And this is where the geography matters and where Bradley asks us to really pay attention. When Joseph gets this warning, they don't just move to the next town over. They don't just go hide in the hills of Judea.
They flee to Egypt.
They flee to Egypt, a different jurisdiction.
Exactly. They cross a border into a foreign land specifically to get outside of Herod's power. And they stay there in exile until Herod dies. They are, for all intents and purposes, displaced people.
But here's the detail Bradley really emphasizes, which I think I've missed in the past, or at least I never really thought about the implications.
Okay.
Even when they start to come back, the fear isn't gone. It's not like Herod dies and suddenly everything is fine and dandy.
No, it's not. They realize Herod's son, Archelaus, is now in charge of Judea. And Joseph is terrified. The text actually says he was afraid to go there.
He thinks the son is going to finish what the father started.
So they can't go back to their original home in Bethlehem. They get diverted to the district of Galilee, to Nazareth.
So they are displaced twice, essentially.
First fleeing the country to save their lives.
And then upon returning, they are unable to go to their specific region of origin because the political threat is still there. It's a life defined by running from political violence.
So let's look at the definition Bradley extracts from that narrative. After laying all this out, he says, "My friends, this is a perfect image of a political refugee."
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Refugee is a modern legal term, right? It was established by the UN and international law long after the Bible was written.
Sure.
So how does Bradley justify using it here? How does he break it down to make it fit?
He's very methodical about it. He lists 3 specific criteria based on the text that, they mirror our modern understanding almost perfectly.
Okay, what are they?
First, a person whose life is in danger, specifically because of a political figure or regime.
Check. That's Herod.
Second, that person has to run to a land not their own, outside that politician's jurisdiction, to avoid being murdered.
Check. That's Egypt.
And third, they live in fear of returning.
Right. Even after Herod's death, when you lay it out like that, strictly looking at the mechanics of the story, it's hard to argue with. It just fits the criteria.
It really does. You have the threat, the flight across borders, and the inability to return safely.
Right. But Bradley knows people struggle with this term when applied to Jesus. It feels... Well, it feels political. It feels like we are projecting 21st century debates onto first century events. People get defensive.
They feel like their faith is being used for a political agenda.
Exactly. And that is why he uses that modern analogy you mentioned earlier. It really helps strip away the religious baggage and just look at the situation on a purely human level.
Michigan analogy.
The Michigan analogy.
Right. He says, imagine a guy living in Michigan, and let's say the governor of Michigan, for whatever reason, explicitly threatens to murder him.
Which is, let's be honest, a terrifying thought. The head of the entire state wants you dead.
It's a complete nightmare scenario. So to survive, this guy flees across state lines to, say, Kentucky. He takes refuge there. He is safe from the Michigan State Police because he's out of their jurisdiction.
Okay.
But then, even after that governor dies, the guy is still too scared to go back to Michigan because the threat lingers.
Yeah.
Maybe the new governor is just as bad, or the political machine is still hostile, Bradley argues. If that happens, what do you call that person?
You call them a refugee. There's really no other word for it.
It's such a powerful simplification. It takes the robes and sandals out of the equation and just puts it in terms of state lines and governors.
Yeah.
You are fleeing state-sanctioned violence to a place where that violence technically cannot reach you.
Exactly. It clarifies the dynamic. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, Bradley notes that every time he preaches this, people get very technical. They start looking for loopholes.
Oh, the loopholes. I've heard this too. The argument usually goes something like, well, actually, Egypt and Israel were both under the Roman Empire, so it wasn't really a foreign country.
Right. It was more like moving from France to Germany within the EU. Or they argue, Jesus didn't break any immigration laws because passports didn't exist back then. It's the technically correct defense.
He wasn't a refugee. He was an internally displaced person within the Roman Empire.
To which Bradley basically says, you're missing the point entirely.
He calls it missing the forest for the trees.
Exactly. His rebuttal is that getting bogged down in the bureaucratic minutia of the Roman Empire ignores the blatantly obvious picture hanging on the wall. The core reality is flight from violence.
Right.
If you are running for your life because the government wants to kill you, discussing whether you had the proper travel visas seems, well, it misses the human reality of the situation entirely.
It feels like a defense mechanism, doesn't it? Like, if we can win on a technicality, technically he wasn't a refugee according to Roman Statute 4.2, then we don't have to deal with the implications of him being one.
I think that's exactly it. It's a way to distance ourselves. Because if we admit he was a refugee, then we have to look at refugees differently.
And that leads us directly to the theological design Bradley talks about. This is the why. Why did this all happen this way?
Right, because Bradley asserts this was not an accident. It wasn't just bad luck that Jesus was born under a tyrant. Yes, Matthew's gospel says it fulfilled prophecy, but Bradley argues there is a deeper, almost strategic intent by God.
And what's that?
He uses this phrase that I think is the core of the whole article: God putting on the skin of a refugee.
That stopped me in my tracks when I read it. God in the skin of a refugee. It's so visceral.
It is a striking image. The idea is that God had spoken throughout the Old Testament about caring for the foreigner, the widow, the orphan, the sojourner. That's a constant theme in the Hebrew scriptures. But in the incarnation, in the act of Jesus becoming human, God didn't just talk about it anymore. He lived it. He experienced that vulnerability firsthand. He knows what it smells like to be in a foreign land. He knows what the fear of a soldier's knock feels like.
And this creates what we might call the mirror effect. Bradley writes, how you treat foreigners, sojourners, immigrants, and refugees is how you treat Jesus, for he was one himself.
And that's the crux of the discomfort. Bradley observes that people resist the refugee Jesus title not because of historical accuracy, but because acknowledging it forces a confrontation with our current attitudes.
Yeah.
If Jesus was a refugee, then how we treat displaced people today becomes a direct reflection of our relationship with God. It stops being a political issue about quotas or borders and becomes a theological crisis.
It reminds me of that verse, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. But Bradley takes it a step further into the legal realm, which I think is where a lot of modern listeners get hung up. He brings up the illegal question.
This is the most sensitive part of the argument. You often hear people say, well, we want to help, but we have laws. We are a nation of laws, and Jesus was perfect.
Right. Perfect people follow the law.
So Jesus would never be undocumented or illegal. He would have done it the right way.
Right. The logic chain is, Jesus is sinless. Breaking the law is a sin. Therefore, Jesus would never cross a border illegally. But Bradley really challenges that middle link. He asks, who said being undocumented is always a sin in God's eyes?
And to illustrate this, he pivots to literature. He brings up Les Miserables.
Which is brilliant because almost everyone knows the story, or at least the musical. Jean Valjean.
Exactly. Jean Valjean, the classic character who stole a loaf of bread. But why did he steal it?
To feed his sister's starving child.
Right. So Bradley asks a series of very pointed questions here. He asks, is Valjean truly the sinner in that scenario? He got 5 years of hard labor for that bread. Did God think that was fair?
It completely flips the script. Bradley asks, was God more concerned with Valjean stealing something that cost a few francs, or was he more concerned with a society that had constructed a system where a man had to steal to keep a child from dying?
It forces us to ask, is the sin the breaking of the statute, or is the sin the injustice of the system itself? Bradley is drawing a sharp distinction between human law, which is often black and white, binary, legal versus illegal, and God's judgment, which is omniscient, compassionate, and contextual.
He has this quote that I highlighted like 3 times in my notes. He's imagining God judging a modern refugee at the pearly gates.
Okay.
He imagines God saying, I know you were going to die if you stayed where you were, but you know the laws of America. You should have stayed and died horribly so I could let you into heaven.
It sounds absurd when you say it out loud. It sounds monstrous.
It sounds cruel. It sounds like a bureaucrat, not a father.
And that's Bradley's point. He asks, does that sound like the God that was shown to us through Jesus? He's arguing that God, as a perfect judge, looks at the context. He knows if you fled to save your life.
Then he says, it's his land anyway. We're just the landlords.
We're just the landlords. That puts things in perspective. It implies that national borders are a human invention, a temporary management system, not some divine absolute.
Right. But let's pause here because I can hear the skeptics. There's a strong tradition in many faiths, including Christianity, of obeying the law of the land. Render unto Caesar and all that.
Sure.
How does Bradley reconcile Jesus, who is supposed to be the fulfillment of the law, with this idea of disregarding borders or rules? Isn't that just anarchy?
That's a fair question. If everyone just ignores the laws they don't like, society collapses. We can't just pick and choose, can we?
So what's his answer?
This brings us to the concept of maladjustment and civil disobedience. Bradley points out a paradox. In his own time, Jesus was accused of breaking religious and social laws constantly.
True. Healing on the Sabbath, eating with the wrong people, touching lepers.
Not washing hands the right way. The religious leaders were always on his case. He was a troublemaker.
Exactly. Bradley says, had we seen it then, we would have probably agreed with the religious leaders that Jesus was playing fast and loose with the rules. But here's the shift. Bradley argues Jesus can't break the law because he is the fulfillment of the law. He's the true law.
So, if the true law, capital L, walks into a corrupt society.
Friction is inevitable.
Precisely. Living by the true law disrupts society. And when you disrupt society, the human lawmakers persecute you. Bradley points out the tragic symmetry. Jesus was threatened by politicians as a child Herod, and he was executed by politicians as an adult Pilate.
He lived and died at odds with the state's power.
And this is where he brings in Martin Luther King Jr., who had a lot to say about this distinction.
Yeah.
Dr. King spoke about the need to be maladjusted to unjust laws. The idea is that if a law is unjust, adapting to it or obeying it is actually the moral failure. Being well adjusted to a sick society isn't a virtue, it's complicity.
Bradley gives some historical examples that are just hard to argue with to prove this point. He mentions the Underground Railroad and hiding Jews from the Nazis.
Right. And think about that. In both those cases, the law of the land was crystal clear. Turn in the runaway slave, turn in the Jewish family. That was the legal requirement. If you followed the law, you were technically a law-abiding citizen. But morally, you were committing a monstrous sin. If you broke the law, you were a criminal in the eyes of the state, but you were doing the righteous thing in the eyes of God.
So Bradley's argument boils down to, sometimes falling in line with the law is the sin.
That is a heavy statement. It really forces you to evaluate where your allegiance lies, with the rule book or with the person suffering right in front of you.
And that connects all the way back to his point about the documented versus undocumented debate regarding Jesus. Bradley is suggesting that God isn't up in heaven documenting the undocumented to hold it against them.
No, he's looking at the heart and the necessity of their flight. It suggests that the label illegal is a human category, not a divine one. A person can be illegal in the eyes of the state, but perfectly righteous in the eyes of God.
So bringing it all together, we have the biblical evidence of the flight, the fear, the borders, the exile.
Sure.
We have the definition of the refugee fleeing violence to a foreign land. We have the theological assertion that God identifies with the displaced God in the skin of a refugee. And we have the ethical argument that morality and legality are not always synonyms.
That's the comprehensive picture Bradley paints. It dismantles the cozy Christmas view and replaces it with something much grittier and more demanding. And he ends the piece with a challenge. It's a call to action, really.
He writes, "We don't want Jesus to be a refugee because that means something today that we don't want to admit." That hit me hard. It's like we want the Jesus who affirms our comfort, not the one who challenges our politics.
He calls it crucifying him back into our own shapes. We try to mold Jesus to fit our worldview, usually a nationalistic or comfortable worldview, rather than letting him shape us.
Yeah.
His final call is to repent, which literally just means to turn around, to change your mind and get back to loving our neighbors. And he adds a crucial qualifier: the ones we have, not the ones we choose, documented or not.
That's the kicker, documented or not.
Yeah.
It removes the filter we usually put on our compassion.
Yeah.
It suggests that our neighbor isn't defined by their paperwork, but by their proximity and their need.
It does. It effectively says that if you claim to follow this refugee God, you lose the right to vet your neighbor before you love them. You don't get to ask for ID before you offer a cup of cold water.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about the mission we talked about at the start, unpacking the uncomfortable implications. I think Bradley succeeds in making us uncomfortable, but in a really productive way. It's not just guilt, it's a perspective shift.
I agree. It moves the conversation from abstract policy to a personal encounter. It's not just about what do I think about immigration policy in the abstract. It's how do I treat the specific person standing in front of me who represents the God I claim to follow?
So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. It's a question that Bradley's piece inevitably leads to. Imagine it's not 2,000 years ago. Imagine it's today. A family arrives at the border. They are fleeing a violent regime. They are terrified. They don't have the right papers because they left in the middle of the night. They are tired, poor, and huddled masses, essentially.
And implicit in Bradley's theology is that in that family is the presence of the divine.
Exactly. If Jesus were to arrive today, under those exact same circumstances, fleeing violence, crossing borders, lacking paperwork, would we recognize him? Would we welcome him? Or would we simply see another statistic to be managed, processed, or turned away because he didn't do it the right way?
It's a question that demands an answer not in words, but in how we live.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. It's a lot to chew on, but that's what we're here for. We'll see you next time.
He came in quiet through the back door of the world. No announcement, just a mother and a road. The night was moving, the stars kept their breath. Love learned how to hide from the sound of death. Oh my God, you were already there. The earth kept spinning, but heaven held still, while mercy was running from the reach of the kill. No home to return to, no place to stay, just borrowed ground and another day. Oh my God, you were already there. You chose the dust, you chose the flight, you chose the dark to bring the light. You crossed the lines we drew in fear. You made your home out here. Every border knows your name, every campfire feels the flame. You speak in hunger, you breathe in need, you wear the face we refuse to see. Oh my God, you were already there. If I turn away, I turn you away. If I close the gate, I close the gate. If love is a body still learning to bleed, then this is the place where you're asking me. You chose the dust, you chose the flight, you chose the dark to bring the light. You crossed the line